The cold metallic grip of the alien restraints bit into his wrists as the old human stumbled forward, dragged through the dusty streets of Korzith by two towering alien guards. He appeared frail, his back hunched under the weight of time and his skin weathered like old parchment. The Zerithians, reptilian overlords of this forsaken colony, hardly paid him any mind. After all, what threat could one old human pose? They had captured him just beyond the perimeter of their hidden outpost, a secluded base on the outer edge of their empire, where human eyes had yet to pierce. The aliens assumed he was a lost wanderer, an easy capture during one of their routine sweeps. They didn't know that the man they had taken prisoner was none other than General Roy Sullivan, a legendary tactician of the human fleet, deliberately allowing himself to be caught. General Sullivan shuffled along, concealing the sharp glint in his eyes behind a mask of senility. The plan was working, better than expected. They had taken the bait. The Zerithians, known for their arrogance and underestimation of humans, were blissfully unaware that they had just arrested one of the most dangerous men alive. Every step the guards forced him to take brought him closer to the heart of their operation, and closer to the completion of his mission. In the dim light of the compound, the Zerithian lieutenant met the old man with a scowl. "Another stray human," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking out with disgust. "I don't see why we bothered taking them alive. They're weak, fragile creatures." He glanced at Sullivan with disdain, dismissing him as insignificant. Sullivan said nothing, allowing the alien's insult to pass. He had expected this kind of treatment. Their disdain for humans was well known. What the lieutenant couldn't see was the small, concealed transmitter embedded in Sullivan's wristband, quietly sending coded signals to the human fleet. Each beat of his pulse carried vital information through the device, painting a precise map of the alien base. "Search him," the lieutenant ordered lazily, as if the task were beneath him. The guards complied, roughly patting down Sullivan's ragged clothes. They found nothing but a small leather pouch of stale bread and a weathered knife, a far cry from the arsenal a general would typically wield. Satisfied that he posed no threat, they shoved him toward a holding cell deep within the base. As the heavy cell door slammed shut, Sullivan allowed himself a moment of stillness. His body ached from the rough treatment, but his mind was sharp, calculating. He could feel the hum of the alien machinery around him, their power systems pulsating with life. The base was a hive of activity, but the Zerithians had grown complacent in their remote outpost, certain that no one would find them here. Sullivan leaned back against the cold metal wall of the cell, his face hidden in shadow. He had studied the Zerithians for years, learned their patterns, their weaknesses. They were cunning, yes, but predictable in their pride. They never suspected a trap, especially not one baited with someone as unassuming as an old man. The general's thoughts drifted briefly to his fleet, waiting in the distant void of space, ready to strike as soon as a signal pinpointed the exact location of the Zerithian base. The coordinates were already being transmitted. The trap was set. Soon, the human forces would arrive, and the Zerithians would learn the hard way that underestimating humans was a fatal mistake. The aliens had arrested an old man, but they had no idea that they had just walked into the jaws of their own demise. He sat in the dim corner of the alien cell, his mind meticulously piecing together the next phase of his plan. To the Zerithians, he was nothing more than a broken old man, an insignificant pawn. But in the silence of captivity, Sullivan's real weapon was at work, his mind. The time for physical combat had passed for him. Now, he fought with strategy, deception, and patience. The communicator embedded in his wristband pulsed softly, sending encrypted signals to the human fleet orbiting just beyond the Zerithians' reach. Every pulse carried valuable data. Troop positions, structural weaknesses, shifts in guard patrols, everything needed to exploit the alien base's defenses. Sullivan had studied the Zerithians long enough to know they relied too heavily on technology, underestimating the human capacity for adaptability and cunning. And now, they were about to pay for their arrogance. He leaned back, replaying the years of preparation that had led him to this moment. The Zerithians had swept across human colonies, exploiting the outer rim worlds with ruthless efficiency. They saw humans as inferior, incapable of matching their superior weaponry and military tactics. But Sullivan had always believed that warfare was won with more than brute strength. The Zerithians fought with cold logic, never factoring in the unpredictability of human determination. He had known this mission would be dangerous, but necessary. He volunteered to be the bait, knowing full well the risk. He needed to get inside, to let them capture him, and it had worked. The Zerithians had no idea they were holding the architect of their downfall. A sudden clang outside the cell door broke his concentration. The lieutenant from earlier, with his green, scaled skin shimmering under the dim light, entered, his cold eyes glaring at Sullivan. He hissed a command in his alien tongue, and a soldier activated the interrogation system. Sullivan was pulled to his feet by the guards and dragged into a sterile room with high-tech devices designed to extract truth from their victims. "Let's see what you know, human," the lieutenant growled, strapping Sullivan into a chair that hummed with power. The general feigned fear, his body slumping as if in resignation. But internally, his mind was racing, cataloging the equipment, searching for any exploitable flaws. The Zerithians were overconfident, believing their machines would break him, unaware that every second he stayed alive was another moment closer to their downfall. As the interrogation began, sharp needles of pain pierced his body. The aliens wanted information about human troop movements, strategies, anything they could extract to get an upper hand in the war. But Sullivan gave them nothing of value, feeding them a carefully crafted web of half-truths and misinformation. He allowed them to believe what they wanted, that he was an aging civilian with no real military ties. Meanwhile, the communicator continued its silent work, transmitting Sullivan's real intelligence to the human fleet. Back on the flagship Perseverance, Admiral Lyra Watson stood over a glowing tactical map, watching as Sullivan's data filled the screen. The trap was nearly set. They had everything they needed to launch a devastating strike against the Zerithians, and the aliens would never see it coming. Sullivan endured the alien torture, his face grimacing, but his mind steadfast. The pain was nothing compared to the weight of the mission. He could see it now. The human forces arriving in waves, disabling the Zerithian defenses, reclaiming the outer colonies. His capture had been a necessary sacrifice for the greater victory that awaited them all. Finally, the lieutenant, frustrated with the lack of progress, waved a hand to halt the interrogation. Sullivan slumped forward, his body weak, but his resolve as sharp as ever. They believed him broken. Little did they know, the human fleet was already closing in. The aliens had no idea that their time was running out. The stillness of the alien base was shattered in an instant. From above, the skies lit up with streaks of fiery red as the first wave of human attack ships broke through the atmosphere. Admiral Lyra Watson had timed the assault with ruthless precision, using the data Sullivan had fed them to strike at the exact moment when the Zerithian defenses were weakest. The ambush had begun. Inside his cell, General Sullivan could feel the tremors rumbling through the walls as explosions echoed from the outer perimeter of the base. The human fleet had arrived. His plan was unfolding exactly as he had envisioned. The Zerithians caught completely off guard. For a brief moment, he allowed himself a thin smile. The alien guards outside scrambled in disarray, their sharp, guttural shouts echoing through the corridors. They hadn't expected this. Their scanners hadn't detected the fleet until it was too late, and now they were in chaos, trying to mobilize a defense that would never be enough. Sullivan wasted no time. He rose, his old limbs moving with newfound purpose. Beneath his tunic, he pulled out a thin wire he'd stolen earlier, using it to short-circuit the cell lock with a deft twist. The door slid open with a hiss, and he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the sounds of battle growing louder with every passing second. The Zerithian lieutenant, now barking orders into a communicator, spotted Sullivan's escape and rushed toward him. "You!" the alien snarled, raising his weapon. But Sullivan was ready. With a swift motion, he disarmed the lieutenant. the years of military training returning to his muscles as if no time had passed at all. The Zerithian crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he could even fire a shot. Sullivan moved quickly now, navigating the labyrinth of alien architecture with practiced ease. He had memorized the base layout during his captivity, using his time to observe guard rotations and weak points. The human forces were already deep into their assault. He could hear the faint crackle of human voices over his hidden communicator, confirming successful breaches in key sectors. Every explosion, every burst of gunfire brought them closer to total victory. Admiral Watson's voice cut through the chaos, steady and commanding. "General Sullivan, we're moving in on your position. We need the central command room secure." "Understood," Sullivan replied, his voice a low rasp. "I'm on my way." As he approached the heart of the base, the scale of the human ambush became clear. The Zerithians had been utterly unprepared for the onslaught. Their once impenetrable defenses were now crumbling under the coordinated strikes from the human fleet. Every detail Sullivan had fed them, the hidden entranceways, the blind spots in their security, had been exploited with surgical precision. The Zerithians, for all their technological superiority, were no match for human adaptability and Sullivan's cunning strategy. Sullivan reached the command center just as a squad of human Marines stormed in from the opposite direction. They moved with lethal efficiency, neutralizing the remaining Zerithian officers without a single wasted shot. The battle was swift, brutal, and decisive. Inside the command center, the Zerithian commander stood frozen, his large, black eyes wide with disbelief. This is impossible," he stammered, backing away as Sullivan and the Marines advanced. "We should have seen you coming." Sullivan stepped forward, his expression cold and unyielding. "You didn't," he said simply. "And now it's over." The Zerithian commander, realizing the futility of resistance, dropped to his knees, his hands raised in surrender. The command center was theirs. The ambush had been an unqualified success. Outside, the sounds of battle were beginning to fade, the human forces mopping up the last pockets of alien resistance. As the Marines secured the base, Sullivan stood in the center of the room, surveying the aftermath. His plan had worked. The Zerithians had been crushed, their base seized, and the tide of the war had shifted in humanity's favor. But he knew this victory, as sweet as it was just one piece of a larger, ongoing conflict. He activated his communicator one last time. "Admiral Watson, the base is ours. Begin the extraction." The battlefield had grown quiet. The once invincible Zerithian base now lay in smoldering ruin, its defenses shattered and its inhabitants subdued. Human Marines moved through the compound with precision, securing the last of the Zerithian prisoners. Above, the fleet hovered like silent guardians, ready to ensure no reinforcements arrived. It was a decisive victory, the kind that would shift the momentum of the war in humanity's favor. General Roy Sullivan stood at the edge of the command center, gazing out at the aftermath of his plan. Despite the success, there was no celebration in his heart. Victory always came with a cost, and though he had achieved his goal, it felt hollow. Sullivan had lived through enough wars to know that triumph rarely brought peace, only more battles, more conflict. Admiral Lyra Watson's voice came through the communicator again. "General, extraction is underway. We'll have you out of there in no time." "Good work, Admiral," Sullivan replied, his voice weary but steady. "Coordinate with ground teams. Ensure there are no loose ends." As he watched the Marines usher Zerithian prisoners into containment fields, Sullivan allowed himself a moment to reflect. The Zerithians had underestimated humanity from the start, dismissing them as weak, disorganized. But that had always been humanity's strength. Their ability to adapt, to unite in the face of overwhelming odds. It wasn't just brute force that had won this battle. It was ingenuity, the willingness to take risks, and the refusal to give up. Sullivan had spent years in service, orchestrating victories, but this mission had been different. This time, he had placed himself on the front lines, allowing the enemy to capture him. It was a gamble, one that could have ended in failure, but it had paid off. The Zerithians had walked right into his trap, and now their base was under human control. Still, the old general knew that even this victory was only a small part of a much larger war. The Zerithians were ruthless conquerors, and while humanity had dealt them a major blow today, the fight was far from over. A young Marine approached, saluting smartly. "General Sullivan, sir. We've cleared the last sector. The prisoners are secure." Sullivan nodded, his mind still half immersed in his thoughts. "Well done, soldier. See to it that our wounded are attended to." As the Marine moved away, Sullivan walked through the charred remains of the base, passing alien structures that had once housed powerful Zerithian technologies. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and burning metal. But for the first time in a long while, the air felt lighter. The oppressive weight of the Zerithian occupation had lifted, at least here, in this small corner of the galaxy. He stopped near a control panel, his eyes tracing the alien symbols. For all their advancements, the Zerithians had lacked the one thing that mattered most in war: adaptability. They had relied on their superior technology and raw strength, never imagining that a single human could infiltrate their ranks and turn their own base against them. Sullivan's tactics had worked because he understood that war wasn't just about weapons. It was about psychology, about getting inside the enemy's head and using their arrogance against them. As he stood there, his communicator buzzed again. "General, extraction team is landing. We'll have you back aboard the Perseverance shortly." Admiral Watson's voice cut in, calm and reassuring. Sullivan took one last look at the alien landscape. "I'll be ready," he said quietly. But as he prepared to leave, his thoughts lingered on the Zerithian prisoners. They would be interrogated, their secrets extracted, but Sullivan knew this victory wouldn't end the war. The Zerithians would retaliate. They always did. For now, though, humanity had the upper hand, and perhaps that was enough. As the extraction shuttle touched down, Sullivan boarded, his body exhausted but his mind sharp. The war would continue, but this battle had been won through wit and willpower. He would fight again, lead again, but for the moment, he allowed himself the smallest measure of satisfaction. The mission had been a success, and for the first time in years, Sullivan felt something close to hope.